turbulent times. The complexities and the conflicts of this age almost defy any kind of solution. The political culture divided by language, religion, and history, it seems to tear us apart. Many of you here are in regional and local leaders. And you're called on to utilize the wisdom of Solomon in finding solutions. And in setting temperatures in your department, in your office, in your community, so that people can at least live reasonably together. In this time I have with you, I want us to see how Jesus dealt with trouble. We aren't going to solve the macro problems here. But there are points where you and I intersect our presence as enablers of grace and wisdom. And I find in this response that I'm going to take you to in a moment, a framework which is useful as I've served in various roles in this country. I'm not here to offer a grand solution to how Canada's national or provincial leaders might operate. And I wouldn't be so obnoxious as to suggest how you operate your own business. But I do find in this story of Jesus a remarkable insight that is neither complicated nor is it culturally contained. In the turbulent moment of his life, he inserted his life lessons into explosive and riveting issues that he and his disciples faced. I'm going to take you to a very popular, well-known, I'm going to find this to be more useful if I may. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had been performing by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread just for one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter, spoke up. "Here's this boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. How far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There's plenty of grass in that place, and he sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over those who had eaten. In this issue, Jesus responds in solving a problem. Now, the calculation is probably 10 to 12,000 people were there. The disciples had run into a problem. It was mid-afternoon. The children that were there with their parents, well, their low blood sugar was screaming. Jesus turned to his leadership team and said, "I want you to solve my problem." And they said, "We can't do it. You've asked us to do the impossible." As I look at this, I ask that simple question: what problem was Jesus solving? We spiritualize this story, but when you look at the reality of that setting, what was Jesus solving? He was asking his disciples to solve the problem of feeding the people. So the question that would obviously come to us as we look at the text, and as we think about what leadership is in turbulent times, what would you do? Now, as leaders, we deal with multiple layers of issues. be it a large organization, a small department, the complexity of the dynamics of people we work with, it makes you feel like we're in a chess match. Because we know that if we make this move, then this will result. And the fear of triggering that unexpected may take us to doing nothing. But we know that the mandate of leadership, regardless of the level that our leadership finds its role in, leadership involves solving problems, solving issues that might take us off course, solving issues that would lead to disaster. Doing nothing is not in our job description. It's not in the job description. And so here in this moment, Jesus is solving a problem. And I find that the framing of his response has been so instructive for me. He brings to us a way of how we deal with turbulent issues. In the macro of life, society-wise, most of those are things that will bubble, solutions may bubble up from the bottom, but it always begins with the micro, and you and I are at the micro level. And so what do we do? Let me suggest to you a takeaway on this story. And as we look at that, I suggest that you apply it to an issue that's in your life right now. A dilemma that is before you. Solutions that seem to, ideas and solutions seem to evaporate before they're applied. Let me suggest Jesus provides an interesting framework of how we deal with our own leadership in turbulent times. There are two movements to his response. The first is quite simple and straightforward. He turned to his disciples and he said, "What do you have? What do you have?" My instinct has been, over years, when I have a problem, is to look for an outside solution. My prayer, and having a Pentecostal background, my impulse may be to ask God to fly in with his B-747 and drop those solutions in my lap. Jesus doesn't want us to go outside. He says, "What do you have? What's in your hand?" The classic line, of course, is Moses. He was intemperate. He was 40 years on the backside of the desert looking after sheep. And one day, Yahweh appeared to him and said, "I want you to lead." And Moses said, "I'm incapable. I'm incompetent." And he asked the one simple question, "What's in your hand? What do you have?" He begins with that. But you see, often we don't even begin there because we miss what we have. And others will dismiss what we do have. We miss because it doesn't seem to be that obvious that it's of value. He begins with you. When we lead in turbulent times, he doesn't start with your neighbor. He doesn't start with somebody outside your doors. He doesn't start with a website. He starts with you. He starts with me. I met Lillian Marshall, Cloverdale Baptist Church in Moncton, New Brunswick, some years ago. It was a Sunday night service. It was a missionary service. The Baptists used to have missionary services. A little humor, folks, very little. She sang the song, "I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord." And she walked out and she says, "Lord, but there's nothing I can do. I'm a widow." She had a little insurance company. The woman coming from Alberta, and she's visiting her son who's at Dorchester, the maximum security prison outside of Moncton. Can she stay? Lillian said, "We'd love to have her." She came and stayed for a few weeks, and as she was going back, she said, "Lillian, there's no one to visit my son. Would you mind visiting him?" And Lillian said, "When I first visited this young man, I walked into the room in Dorchester where I was to meet this prisoner in high security. And she said, as I walked across the room, I heard in my ear, 'Woman, behold your son.' said, I loved him from the very beginning. Led him to faith. As she would visit him, others would want her to visit them. Now, if she was younger, I suppose we could understand why. Oh, you got the hook, did you? I was a little afraid. Out here in Vancouver, I've been in Saskatchewan too long to remember realities. Pierre Allard, who was chaplain of the prison at the time, he said all of a sudden things began to happen in the prison. He said violence began to decrease. Drug intake was lessened. He said guards started taking lifers home on their day off. And he said when God does something among prisoners, you know something's happening. But when he does it among prison guards, you know he's reading something. What did she have? She was older. She was a woman. She had had sons. Everyone else missed what she had. Begin with what you have. Take seriously what you have. I stood outside the prison, in the prison cell of Nelson Mandela and Robin Prison, the little island off the South Africa. While he was in prison, he took what he had, which were prison guards, and made them their friends. And out of that, in part, helped him succeed as president of South Africa. Begin with what you have. Now, of course, this little fellow, his mother had packed him the lunch. It was his. He was reluctant to give it up, but even before, he would ask me, what was this of value to others, this little bit of lunch? Begin with what you have. Do an inventory. The struggles and the failures of your life become the inventory. But now comes the hard part. Give it away. Because you and I have no idea what we have until it's given away. We have no understanding of the potential of what is natively ours until it's released. What does giving away do? It releases me from self-absorption. And you can be in a conversation not very long before you know the conversation is about ourselves. It also helps me to see that life is more than a zero-sum game. Zero-sum meaning that there's only so much, and if I give this, there's not enough for another. I learn to see the needs of others. But more powerfully is the internal transformation that occurs in my life when I give away. The transformation that happens in who I see myself to be and what I'm able to do. I am transformed in the process of taking that which I have and putting it into the hands of Jesus. I've been involved for some 60 years in various ministries in Canada and international. I have gone through my theology from undergraduate to doctoral work. I've read books like you have. I've looked at the essence of faith, the nature of the gospel, societal needs. And I've come I'm 80 this year. I've come to this simple conclusion, that at the very heart of creation is generosity. In this sense. Because nothing happens until something is contributed to that which by synthesis makes something new. Look at our own lives. Mother and father, egg and sperm, given, contribute, creates who we are. But we have an instinct not to give away, not to participate in this creational activity. We've been astounded by the new telescopes that bring us information and pictures from, well, distances that I can't understand. One picture I looked at, it said it took 2 million years for that picture to come from where it first occurred to my eye. 2 million years. I don't even understand. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I do know that in this creation that's expanding itself at the speed of light, whatever is created comes from other activities that synthesize and create. Generosity is a fundamental principle of the universe. It's a multiplier, and it works in all of life. But I'm reluctant to give. I'm afraid that what I have, I'll lose, and so I protect it. I'm fearful I'll fail if I give more than I should, and the older I get, the more I try and calculate how much more do I need till the end of life, and that simply drives me to more protection, to hold on to more, just in case I don't have enough. But giving away, generosity is at the core of creation. It doesn't mean that I lay it down, but I take it up and I do something with it. You know, on the scale of life, there are givers and takers. Takers 1, givers 10. Where are you? When you look at your life, where have you been on that 10-point scale? Where are you today on that 10-point scale? This little guy became a giver. He had never planned it when he started that day. He may not have recognized the needs of others who, without a mother to provide that little lunch, they didn't have enough. But in that moment, in the giving, never understanding the capacity of what he had, in the response of Jesus, he took what he had and he gave it, and the multiplying effect took over. Why does it matter that you and I begin with what we have? Because it's being real. I find sometimes people I'm part of the evangelical community, I find sometimes we are unrealistic. We operate in religious hyperboles as if God is going to come in and magically destroy our enemy or meet our need. But when he says, what's in your hand? He's saying, what do you have? That which you discount may be in fact the very thing that he wants to use. I had an older brother who his wife lost their daughter when she was 17 with self-inflicted death. It was a huge tragedy in the family. If you've been through it, you understand that that's the devastation of this earth. But I found in time that the depth of that sorrow, the experience of wrestling with the nature of losing your lovely daughter, became itself the multiplier through their lives of caring for others in need. Their very sorrow became what they had in their hand. It became the multiplier. Begin with what you have. It's being real. Amen. Then why is life made good by giving it away? In turbulent times, dealing with turbulence is itself an impossibility. It's like getting a hold of a hurricane. How do you get hold of a hurricane? You can't. Turbulence is not something you can take and modify. What we do in the process of taking what we have and giving, I am changed. And daily I know I'm in need of change. I understand my proclivity to self-interest to accusation, to possessiveness, to naivete. I understand that. And that's why daily I need the transformation of his presence in my life. This is not something you do once in life and that's it. It is a transforming process whereby God is continually at work. We become the means by which he transmits to others. And as we become his conduit, it's like a muscle. You use it or you lose it. The capacity to be the conduit of God to others through our lives is kind of a muscle. And muscle memory happens by what we do or don't do. So when I go back to my golf game next spring, I'll have lost a certain amount of muscle, the right kind of muscle memory, and the muscle memory of atrophy may have taken over, which means exercise and relearning a bit is what, within God's activity in our lives, he wants to do that every day. So I am transformed in the process of giving. And others become the beneficiary. The procreation, the most basic form of sustaining creation. I was recently in Saskatchewan with my friend up by Tisdale, and they are using 100-foot cedars now. That's SEEDERs for those who aren't from Saskatchewan. 100-foot cedars. I love the farm. I love watching and being part of their life. But you know, nothing happens until the seed is sown. You have an idea, you have a business that's been in your mind for years, and now you want to make a move. It's risky. It might not work. It might blow up in your face. The competition may be too tough. You might lose the election. You've saved funds, you've secured credit, or you've gotten a partner. But it only begins with a generous spirit. Investing is taking what is secure and pushing it outside the circle of my protection. And only when the seeds are planted will the idea itself ever come into reality. Giving is tough. The boy's natural reaction was, it's mine. That's the contradicting factor. Because giving challenges my very instinct. I want to be sure I'm fed. But love is giving to another. Hatred is hoarding. Love propels generosity. Self-interest robs another of the potential. But love cuts across the political landscape of today, defying my inbred instincts, releasing a spirit that reproduces itself in goodness and well-being for others. Now, I'm just not talking about a namby-pamby love or generosity. The very rootedness of this text is in what Jesus does in the transforming of people's lives, both internally, who they are and are becoming, and what they can do by their generosity. Our current political divide, big party politics, or often ethnic-defined hostility, is a thief. It robs others from accessing what might be available to them, and it robs me of the very power of God's life, which by flowing through us transforms me from a self-serving instinct, which is so characteristic of humanity and greed. But God's gift is multiplied by transference. What I have becomes yours. And this shows the zero-sum universe for what it is. Not just delusional, but a tragic lie. And what is ironic is that in giving it away, what I have becomes more. For in holding on to what I have, those gifts are lost. In giving, they reappear in time. And the more they become more as the multiple effect takes over.
Addition will never get us to where we want to be. The multiple effect of generosity returns to the giver that which defies an addition table. Now, you and I have experienced this transference. As a university student, a man heard me speak, and he engaged in my life, and he opened doors beyond my gifting. His wife and he felt a huge reward in their giving, and it triggered in me something that's lasted for 60 years. Many influenced my life. But he, at his point, giving what he had enabled me that has changed my life forever. A kind word, it lifts the load of failure and weariness. It sparks new energy and renews creative thoughts. It inspires a willingness to try again. Is a kind word hard to find? Is something lost when I give a kind word? A political leader recently referred to another person as being Nazi. And she was asked about why she would do that. And she said, oh, but they're just words. Well, words are heavy. They're weighty. They can lift or destroy. They can enable or distress. They can open or shut windows of thought. And they can set in motion a whirlwind of fear and hatred, catch with power like a tornado fueled by warm seas below, transferring that energy into destructive winds. We're so aware of how one person can unloose goodness or destruction. And that isn't just on the visible stage of public scrutiny. My concern is that you and I catch that point today. We too are that warm ocean below. What we do enables goodness on a micro level. Oh, you and I can wince and groan at the heavyweights who struck their personal feelings on the public stage. But what I want to know is, how am I doing in setting loose that creative act that enables others, transforms me, and puts in motion those factors which bless the multitudes there on the grassy slopes of our society? The boy gratefully learned that small and life-changing lesson when he said, what I have is yours. Not wanting to be melodramatic, I have a sense we're building up cultural steam for trouble here in our own land. My frequent trips to Ukraine 4 times this last year, it helps me see how wars are created. However, here in our world, it's critical that we leadership look at the warning signs. Obvious are the deep cleavages of hostilities, with powerful feelings on both sides. Sometimes you and I sit in a family meeting and we keep our mouths shut because we know that if we say something, explosions take off. But the danger is to think that I have all the answers and that my winning is the end game. But we live together. We have no option. And you and I, we set the tempo of our engagement. We unleash feelings of hatred or humanity. Giving gifts to another is not to deny our ideas or persuasions, but it does acknowledge the right for others to think they're right. 3 things happen when I respond to what I have and give it away. First of all, it helps me to be mindful of the good and harm I can do. And you and I do good and harm every day, as insignificant as we think we might be. Secondly, it becomes a teaching moment for others who observe us. How often have you seen another do good and you say to yourself, that's what I'd like to be and do? And third, you and I set in motion ideas that lift and empower others. As little as we think you and I influence, we do. It took that small gifting of bread and fish to feed 10,000. But it was more than just a meal. It was instructive to the disciples on whose shoulders the church would rest. And from that Galilean moment, that powerful message of giving what can mean for you and me, it became universal. A few years ago, I was serving a national religious community of evangelicals. And because of that, I would periodically meet with senior political leaders in Ottawa. It was one of those days. So it was a one-on-one with the PM. And of course, our committee went over carefully what I would ask in that time alone. I arrived early. I was sitting in the side room, and they served me coffee, and I had 15 or 20 minutes, and I'd been reading Daniel 12 of late. And I flipped it open, and the text of that translation was to the effect, in the year King Darius I arose to be an encouragement and protection for the king. And I heard between these 2 years that silent voice, Stiller, bless the king. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with all these things that we want from him that we're going to be asking the government to do? Of course, I didn't know it was the Spirit either. You know, it may have been the pizza I had the night before. Time came, he went in with coffee. He asked me some questions. Finally, he said, Ryan, what's your agenda today? And in that moment, I made a choice, and I said, Mr. Prime Minister, I don't have an agenda. I'm here for one reason, and that's to encourage you. But he hadn't heard that in a while. It was a little surprise. And so we did some biblical texts and a prayer, and in time I left. No idea it's about it. Of course, the committee wanted to know what was the response. How did he respond to my questions? And I said, no, just, I got to tell you what I did. They agreed it was the pizza the night before. But a week later, I was getting on the plane and I was walking through the business class back to the plebeian area. Minister of Justice was sitting there. You're from the same, both from Saskatoon. He called me over and we got talking. Finally, he said, Brian, whatever happened to you in the PM last week? I said, what? What happened? Oh, he said, we were in the cabinet. We were waiting for him. It took me quite a while. He was quite late for the cabinet meeting. And so I said, what was the problem? Oh, he said, there was no problem. He said, when he came in, he said, told him about his meeting, the Bible study he had. I didn't know the Bible study. He said to the cabinet, he said, if we ignore or misunderstand the evangelical community, the government's the loser. And you know that opened more doors, gave more listening ears out of all the protests or demands I could have made. And it happened out of one little idea. Bless another. What's a blessing? Like how do you make concrete a blessing? How do you estimate the value of a blessing? It's nothing until it's given away. How do we lead in turbulent times? To go back to Ukraine, I would offer a suggestion as to how you solve that war. Who am I to offer a suggestion, tell people how to solve that? But what I can do, I can take what is simply mine, along with others, and through the mighty presence of Christ, when given away, it turns from the addition table to the multiplier table. And it becomes something way beyond what you and I ever anticipated. You are His by His own creation and by His calling and by His living in your life. You are incalculable. This is not some kind of psychobabble to make you and me feel good. That's not what this is about. That's not what the gospel is about. It's about taking seriously who you and I are, what He has gifted us with, and recognizing in the broad sphere of creation and in the smaller sphere in which you and I live, that he values what we have. He says, now if you just release it, let it go. We have no idea what we have until it's given away. May you and I find in the micro-living of our own lives that within your heritage, your life, you have legacy. Legacy released becomes his blessing and affirmation to others. Oh God. Give me freedom to be a giver and not a taker. Help me to see the 10,000 that are